Hello, good people, and welcome to Finex Skills Up. Here, we learn, we connect, and we grow. So we continue our series on how to build interactive dashboards in Excel using Power Query, Power Pivot, DAX, and all the BI tools that allow you to get insights from raw data. In this video, we want to look at an HR dashboard. The goal is to be able to take data from a series of tables and then give insights on organizational indicators like average appraisal, cost to employer over month, turnover rate, and all those things that are important for human resource management. In this case study, we'll also show you how to look up staff pictures as part of the dashboard. As usual, we share the start file with you so you can come with us step by step. So let's get ready and start building this. So this is our final work, an HR dashboard that gives us insights on staff population, broken down by gender. It also gives us insights on exits, broken down by resignations and terminations. We also have an appraisal visual that gives us the performance over time for selected departments or the entire organization. Then there's a visual that breaks down the cost to employer in terms of analyzing payroll by month. Then below, there's a detailed breakdown of payroll by department. So here we can break down by basic pay, allowances, taxes, and then cost to employer. Then we also get insights on our turnover rate over time. Of course, these are not static. We have slices and timelines to help us drill down into a particular department. So I can select particular departments and then see the performance of each department. If I don't select any department, I'm looking at the entire organization. For these metrics, we can also go back in time. So for the current staff, we can go back in time to see the staff strength over a period of time. So this timeline allows us to go back all the way to 2018 in this case, okay, or stretch it back to where we were. As long as you have the data, you can have all these insights even in present or going back. Now, this right part gives us insights on the organization. So we have tagged this organization indicators. On the left part, if you want to look up any staff's details, then you can come and select the staff. So here, I have Osbert currently selected. If I switch to Na, I get the details of Na, including her picture. Right, so this will give you an overview of the staff, and then you can use all these to make the decisions that you are interested in. So we want to learn how to build this using the Lookup features and the BI tools to get us all these insights. So let's get started. So before we begin, it is important we go through the tables and how we are going to use Power Query and Power Pivot and the rest of the tools in Excel to move from raw data set to our dashboard. So basically, we are going to have three categories of tables: the register, the payroll, and the tracker. The register will be a table that contains the records of staff. Every staff has a unique record in this table, plus all the attributes we need to create our analysis. So the department, the account name, the gender, and all those details will be here. This is a typical dimension table. It only changes when we add new stuff. Then there is the set of payroll sheets. These payroll sheets are run on a monthly basis. So when we run a current payroll, we add the sheet to our workbook. In this case study, we have 6 versions of the payroll from January to June. We've designed it such that they have the same headers, and then we are going to name it consistently with a prefix. That would allow us to be able to combine them into one query in our final analysis. Then we have the tracker. So the tracker is a dedicated table to monitor the events on staff. So when we hire, we record. When they resign, we record. When they go on leave, when we do appraisals and all those things, we use this to monitor every event for each staff so that we don't have to go back and forth on the register to make changes. So we are treating the tracker here as a typical activity table. From here, we can calculate our appraisal points and all that. So from these three categories of tables, we use Power Query to modify, shape, and transform them into the queries that will help us in our analysis. So in Power Query, we'll create a records query, which will be the same as our register, right? Then we'll combine all our payroll sheets and create one combined payroll query. This is going to be live so that if you add new payroll sheets, it gets updated to the combined version in the Power Query. Then we'll create our tracker query, which again will be similar to the tracker table. Now, you notice that the records query is in green. This is a typical dimension table. This is where we'll draw our filters. So we'll be able to break down by department and all those other details that we want to break down our calculations with. Then the payroll and then the tracker queries will be our fact tables. Then we'll add one more dimension table, which is the calendar table that allows us to do our analysis by year or any date attributes that we are interested in. Then from here, we'll go to the data model in Power Pivot. We create a data model that will now combine all these queries into one, if you like, virtual data source. We'll connect the queries using a common relationship. When we do this, any pivot table that we insert is able to speak to all the columns in the tables that we used. So we'll create different pivot tables and then use it to drive all the key indicators that you saw in the dashboard. Then we'll create our DAX measure. In this case study, we'll create just a single DAX measure. And then finally, we'll use our charts and slices to create this final dashboard that you saw. So this is the roadmap. This is how we'll start. And this is how we use the tools to create our final interactive dashboard. So if you're game, let's start work and go through our data sets. Okay, so this is our register. As I indicated, it has the unique records for each staff. So every detail of the staff is here. We also have a column that has the picture for each staff. So if you are using a current version of Excel, you can directly paste each picture in the cell, or you can also use a link, right? This is what gave us the picture lookup in the final dashboard. So this is the register. Then following the register are our payroll sheets. So you realize we have January, February, March, April, May, and June. All these have the same headers. It's very important to keep it in this form so that they can easily be combined in the query. Now, apart from the consistent headers, we've converted these into tables. So if you go into the table design, the prefix is payroll underscore the month. This is for January. Then if I come to February, it's the same thing. So payroll underscore Feb, right? And so on. So if you run a new payroll sheet, you just have to insert the new numbers and then name it July and then name the table. When it refreshes, it will be added to your dashboard, so you don't have to start all over again. So that is the set of payroll sheets that we have. Then we have our tracker. So over here, we record the events for each staff using the staff ID, right? So if you hire, we just record with the ID and then we put the event here. You can also provide details for the event. And then if you have appraisal too, you can also have appraisal. So you realize that in the event list, we have a lot of activities that are very typical on HR activities, absenteeism, appraisal, and all those things. If you take appraisal, you see that we have given room for the points for each staff anytime you do appraisal. This can be year on year, right? So this way you can track the progress of each staff over the years. Then you also use this to also monitor exits. So if you take exits, you can give details on what type of exit it was, whether it was a resignation or a termination and all that. Here in this table, when staff also go on leave, you can mark the leave days using the ID, right? A number of days that the person took and all those things. So this is a typical activity table for each staff. So these are the sets of tables that we are going to use. Now we'll load all of them into Power Query and draw our unique queries. So we are now going to load all these tables into Power Query. To get to Power Query, you go to Data. In the file left section, you see the Get and Transform Data group. This is where you load data from different files, right? Now, for our case study, we will be launching a blank query. So we'll get that from other sources and then we choose blank query in the last option in the list. So I'll click on blank query. Now this brings me into the Power Query editor. Now the reason we launched a blank query is that we want to query the tables in the current workbook, right? We've named our tables already, so this way, if there are new tables, it gets refreshed and added to our data. So we'll stand in the formula bar and we'll start a formula. So the formula is equal to excel.current workbook. So this is the function we are going to use. I'm writing an M code because I'm in the Power Query editor. That is the formula language. So we open and close bracket. Now when I press enter, this is going to bring the list of tables. So you notice that as we name them, they are listed here. In some cases, you may have some named range and sheets and all that. But here, the focus is that if we see the content column, if you click on the side, you see that each table here has details that can be expanded and accessed, right? So we are going to use this approach to query all the 3 categories of tables that we will need. So this first query is going to be for the register. I'm going to duplicate this, right click and duplicate, and then make this for the payroll, right click and duplicate, and then we'll use this final one to get the tracker, right? So this is the default view. Now, because I want the register, this time around, don't click on the side, click on the table itself to expand it. So I'll click on this. So this gives me my register. You have the employee ID, name, gender, and so on. Now, some steps have been executed here. So basically, it went through the source, we came to the navigation, and then applied the right data type to each column, right? So let's name this our register, or we can name it records for this purpose. Okay, now we can make some changes to this query. You realize that it didn't load the picture well. So for our purpose, we can get rid of the column here. For the picture, we are going to be using a direct lookup on the table. So we will not need that column over here. So that is for our records query. Then we come to the next one, which is to extract all the payroll tables. Now, the reason we named all the payrolls consistently with the prefix payroll is to use that as criteria to extract the tables that are payroll sheets. So what we are going to do is that in the name column, we'll apply a filter, right? And then we use a text filter. So basically we are saying that all the tables that contain, so we'll choose contains and then enter the keyword payroll, right? So you ensure that all subsequent payroll tables are named with a prefix. So when we do this, this will now filter and give us just the payroll tables. Now, the important thing here is that the headers are also the same. So if all those are met, it means we can actually expand all these tables into one combined or appended table. So I'll click on this expand icon. Okay, so I have all the columns confirming that. Then I would uncheck use original column name as prefix. We don't want to repeat the other table names. Okay, and then make sure it's at expand, right? So I'll click OK, and this now puts all the tables together, right? So always ensure that the data type is rightly assigned. If it's left at ABC123, then it means you don't have a data type assigned yet. So one quick way you can fix this is while all these columns are highlighted, you can go to transform and then you click on detect data type. You now have all the data types applied. Sometimes it doesn't get it right. For example, for employee ID, it profiled it as a whole number. We don't really need this as a whole number because we are not going to aggregate. So for some of these corrections, you can make them. So instead of a whole number, we can profile this as text. So I'll replace this step. Okay. For dates, we can make this a proper date instead of date and time. Okay. So I'll replace that step as well. And for the rest of our numbers, we can rightly leave them as decimals, right? For the last column, which has the payroll and the months, we can extract only the last 3 characters, which represents the month. So what we'll do here is I'll select this, go to transform, and then use extract, right? And choose last characters. So over here, I'll count the last 3 characters, and then this gives me only the month. Just to be sure you have all the months present, you can click on the filter icon and you notice that your first 6 months are here, right? So let's name this appropriately. So this is going to be the payroll query. Now let's come to the tracker. So for the tracker, we go through the same process. What we're interested in is the tracker table. So we'll come right here and then expand the tracker table, right? So here we go through the correction of the data types. So this is going to be a date. We'll correct it to a date. Employee ID is going to be text. So we profile it accordingly. And then event is text. ABC has some null values. We leave it as it is. And then for the days and points, we will leave them as whole numbers. Now this we can name tracker. So I'll name this tracker. Right. So basically what we've done is that we've been able to extract our dimension table records and then our 2-fact tables, payroll and tracker. Okay. The next thing we want to do is to be able to create the calendar table. Now it's very important you understand how the tables are set up. The calendar table is supposed to have dates that cover every activity from onboarding staff to payment, even to events that happen in the tracker. So we need a timeline that covers the earliest date all the way to the latest date, right? So to do that, we want to start a blank query. Now to start a blank query here, I'll right click, new query, and then other sources, and I'll launch a blank query from here. So I'll click on the blank query. Now, what we want to do is we want to use a custom M code to be able to pick the earliest date and then give us a series of dates in a daily sequence all the way to the latest date, right? So we'll go equal to number.from, open our bracket, okay, then list.min. Right, so number.from stamps a date or a number, right? Now, for us to get that date, we are scanning for the minimum date. If you look at the entire data set, the earliest date will likely come from the tracker because when we hire people, we note when we hire them from here, right? These things are not cast in stone, it's just relative to the case study, right? So if you look at the tracker, when we hire the first time, we put the date here. So we'll pick our first date from the tracker, right? M code is case sensitive, so ensure that you are using the right case and you are picking the right column or table names. So this is going to give us the minimum date. I'll close this for list.min and then close this for number.from, right? This whole formula is going to stamp the earliest date. So I'm going to copy this, Control C, I've highlighted it. Then I'll bring 2 dots. Right, the 2 dots is to create the sequence or series of dates. So all the way to, I'll paste the same thing here. Now on the right side, we are looking for the latest date in the series. So the first change I'm going to do is I'll change min to max over here. There are different ways to look at this. When are we likely to have the latest activity? If you look at the case study, payroll is run on the 25th of every month, right? But between when we run payroll, there can be activities in the tracker. Okay, we are not too sure when this will happen. So what we can do is we can fix the maximum date still on the payroll date. That one, at least we are guaranteed it will be the 25th. So this is the payroll date, but we can make an adjustment, right? And run a plus 30 on this. Okay, so if this goes into the next month, at least we know it covers every post-payroll activity in the tracker. So basically, we are just going through this so that you understand how you can create a flexible timeline to cover all the dates in your series. There are different ways to do this, but it's the understanding that is important. So my start date all the way to my latest date. Now to get those dates, I need to now wrap all that I have done in a curly bracket. So after the equal sign, I put a curly bracket here, and then I put a curly bracket here as well, and I'll press enter. Right, so this is going to now give me a series of dates. This is a list. I have to convert this into a table, so I'll go and convert this into a table. click OK, and I now have the primary column of my calendar table. These are dates, right? So I'll come to ABC123 and then format this as a proper date. We can now proceed and bring in the other attributes in our table. That is the date attributes you'll be using in your analysis, right? Let's name this calendar. Okay. And then for the first primary column, we'll name it date. Now, for all the attributes we are going to add, we will stand in the add column tab. Okay. So from here, we'll use the date icon and we can add all the date attributes we need. We'll need year. So we'll draw year from here. Then I'll come to date again and we'll also add month values, right? So add the month values. This will be used to sort our month names. Then we'll come back to the date and then we'll come and draw our name of month, right? So depending on the kind of dashboard you are building, you can draw the attributes as you want. Now we can abbreviate this if you want. So I can come to transform, extract just the first 3 characters and then put in 3 for count, right? So these are my extra columns for my calendar table. So we've now drawn 2 dimension tables, records and calendar. Then we've also created our queries for our fact tables, payroll and tracker. Now from these 2, we are going to create our measures and then we'll draw our slices or break down filters from the records and calendar table. So now that we are done, we can move from Power Query and then go and create our data model in Power Pivot. To do that, I'll come to Home, go to Close and Load and choose Close and Load to, right? It must be said that we are downloading this as a connection, okay, and then adding it to the data model. Because we queried the current workbook, it is important you don't have any extra tables apart from the ones we are working with. Otherwise, they'll be profiled and added to the queries in your data model, right? So we'll keep it as it is and then load this to the data model. So from this point, we can now go to Power Pivot. If you are using Power Pivot for the first time, you have to enable it. If you already use it, it should be a tab sitting right in the command tab list. Now to activate it for the first time, you come to Data, and then in the Data Tools group, you see this icon, the data model. You click on it once, it opens the Power Pivot environment. When you close it, you see Power Pivot here, right? Now, let's go to Manage. So when we click on Manage, we should see all the tables that were loaded in Power Pivot here. So I have my records, payroll, tracker, and my calendar, right? This is the data view. Now I want to switch to the diagram view. The reason I'm doing this is to allow me to see the tables visually and then connect them using common columns, right? So basically we are creating a relationship. Now the typical layout is that we put the fact tables, the tables that allow us to create our calculations or the activity tables below, and then we place the filter or dimension tables above, right? It doesn't really matter if you arrange it anyhow, but the idea is to help you connect the slider that flows into the activity tables. So for tracker, the common column between tracker and the records is the employee ID, right? We book all the activities with the IDs, right? So we connect this, you have a one-to-many, and then for tracker and calendar, we do dates to dates. So we'll do this one as well. So these tables are now connected. We switch to payroll. So that one, we have employee ID connecting this one, and then we have date connecting to this date, right? So by this, we just created our data model. We can now insert pivot tables that will now read all the columns that are here. As long as they are connected, we can create summary tables with them. So at this point, let's use this pivot table icon as an exit from the Power Pivot, which will allow us to create our first pivot table. So I'll click on this and then I'll dump it in a new worksheet. Okay, so this worksheet, I'm going to call it calculations. It's going to be the backstage for all the calculations that we'll do in our dashboard, right? So before we begin our calculations, it's important to note that every pivot table we create is going to drive one of these indicators we see in our dashboard. So we've gone through this already. Now, our main goal is to calculate the active staff at every point in time. We are doing it such that you can go back in time and then see how many staff were active at any point in time. So our goal is to calculate the number of staff active as at 2022, split it by gender, right? Now, to be able to do this, we would have been able to just use the records table. So if I'm using this pivot table and I come to records, and let's say I drag the name column into the value section, it gives me 30. 30 means that I currently have 30 people on the register. But out of this 30, some people have resigned. If you come to the tracker, you notice that if I filter on exits, okay, it will tell me that 7 people have left. So from the 30, 7 exits should give us 23, right? So this will not be a good way. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to incorporate the tracker exits and hirings. So if I choose the tracker, let me take the name off and I come to the tracker. I can start off with all the events. So I'll take the events and then push it in the value section. This will count all the events that have passed through the activity table. I can break this down by the event type. So I can take the event type and then put this in the row section. Here you see the number of hirings we've done and the exits, right? If I want to focus on just these two, I can put in a filter, okay, and then just select these two. This will now give me 30 and 7. So subtracting these two, I can get my 23. But how do we go back in time? So this is just giving me as at the latest month and year. But if I want to go back in time, then it means I need to include a timeline, right? In a pivot table, I can insert a timeline. A timeline is similar to a slicer, right? It allows us to filter on columns that have dates. So if I insert a timeline, this is what I get. So usually I can set this to years, quarters, month, or dates. Let's choose years. So this is what I have. Now with all these selected, it means that this is giving me the cumulative count of active staff from 2018 to 2022. If I select only 2022, I have only the exits in 2022, right? But if I drag on to the left, then it gives me all that happened in prior years. So it means that from 2022 onwards, we didn't hire anybody. We last hired somebody in 2019. And then if I go all the way back, we did all the hirings in 2018. So that's what a timeline gives you. Okay. Now, with just the pivot table and the timelines, we could directly create the calculation of our 23 staff from here, right? But there's an easier way to do it. We can put all the things that we've gone through in a single measure, right? So let's learn how to create that measure that will give us the count of active staff based on the timeline that has been selected. So to do that, I'll go to Power Pivot, okay? And you see measures. So this is how we create our calculations in the data model. So I'll start a new measure. Now this measure, let's name it active staff. So we'll name it active staff, we'll put it in the records table. Now the function we are going to use is called calculate. This is a DAX function, right? It basically evaluates an expression. An expression is a calculation, right? So just using the same logic that we used, we are going to just count the number of events. We'll use count rows. Right, so count rows will just count the number of entries in a particular table. So for this, I'll give it tracker, right? So a request for a table, I'll give it tracker, and I'll close my count rows. Now, after the expression, which is the calculation, we need to apply our filter. Remember, when we counted all the events, we put in a filter on hired to get the number of hired people, right? So let's first get the number of hired people. So that filter is going to come from the tracker table, okay, from the event column. Okay, so tracker event should be equal to, then I'll put in hired as we have it in the column. Okay, so tracker event is equal to hired. That is our first filter. I'll bring a comma and then introduce the second filter. The second filter is the timeline. So basically what we want is that if a date is selected from the calendar table, okay, we are interested in all the dates that are less than or equal to the maximum date that has been selected in the calendar table. Okay, so this is the second filter. So max calendar dates would ensure that we get all the dates prior to our last dates as the timeline has been selected. Okay, I'll close this. So if I was just dealing with just this formula, it's going to give me the 30 as we have it here. Okay, now we want to use the same formula, so you can highlight this, copy, Control C, and then bring in a subtraction, Shift Enter to go down, and then paste what you just did. Now the only change here, as you would have guessed, is we are changing hired to exit. Okay, so if we do this, we now can calculate the hired and then subtract the exit and then throw in our timeline as a second filter. Now let's check if our formula is correct. So our formula is correct. We can even format it using 1000 separator to decimal places if you want. Okay. Now if I click OK, you now realize that I now have a measure for active staff here, right? So instead of using the count of events, right, I'm going to take this off my pivot table and then bring in the active staff, which is 23. Normally, when you bring in measures, you get this pop-up to detect new relationships. You can ignore that. Okay, so this count of staff, we can now, instead of breaking it down by event, take the event out and then choose to break it down by gender. Right, so this will now give us a measure of active staff, which is 23, and we can break this down by female and male. Okay, so yes, we could use pivot tables directly, but another way you could also make your job easier is to transfer all the logic into one simple measure. So later we are going to use this to create our first visual. So now that we've created our active stuff, let's go to our second calculation, which is to break down our total exits by resignations and terminations. Right, this we are going to use pivot tables. So I'll go to insert and insert a new pivot table from the data model. So I'll place it in the existing worksheet. I've mentioned that ideally you should be placing new pivot tables in new worksheets, right? That way, if it expands, you don't have it going into existing pivot tables. But to make it easier for you to follow, I'll place all the pivot tables side by side in the same worksheet. Now, if we want to create a summary table for the number of exits, we could again start off from the tracker table. Okay, so if I drop all the events in the value section, it gives us 474 events. Now from this count, I can filter out the exits, right? So I can take event again and then push it in the filter section here. Okay, if I come here and I look for only exits, select this and I click OK, it gives me 7. Okay, now in the tracker table, we had a column that gave us details of the activity. So I can take the detail section, the detail column here, and then push this in the row section. Okay, so this will now break down the number of exits by resignation and termination. Okay, so this will now be our second pivot table. Later, we'll link this up with our visual. Now, for the third pivot table, it talks about appraisal. So again, I will leave some columns, come to insert, pivot table, the data model, and then place this in an existing worksheet. Okay, so again, the activities happen in the tracker. So for this event, we are interested in the number of points that came out of our appraisal, right? So I'm going to take days and points column because this is where we record all the appraisal. It gives us 347. But why are we here? We are here because of appraisal. So I'm going to open this up, right? And then take the events into the filter section. Okay, so over here, I'll look for appraisal. This is our appraisal. And when I filter, I get 347. It's the same because in the table, you realize that we only awarded points in that column for appraisal, but it's a summing, right? We don't need the sum of all the points in appraisal. We need an average, right? So we just have to change the calculation that is going on in the value section. So in the value section, I'll come here, click on this drop down and change the value field settings. The default behavior for numbers is sum. I'll choose average here and then I'll click OK. So this will now give me the average for any department that I select, or even for the entire organization, right? So as I indicated, later we'll do our visuals on each of these pivot tables. Now, the next one is the cost to employer trend by month. So again, we'll leave some 3 columns to the right, and then we'll start a new pivot table. So standing in here, I'll go to Insert Pivot Table. From the data model, I'll insert a pivot table using the existing worksheet option. Now, this one is a bit straightforward. We want the total cost to employer, which is an item in the payroll section, right? So this is the column we are interested in. So I'll push this to the value section. So in the current year, this is how much we've spent. Now we want to break this down by month. And that is why we brought in the calendar table, right? It's a preferred table to break down all your calculations by any date attribute. So we are using the month name. So I'll take this month name and then bring this here. So when I create this summary table, you'll notice that first, we don't have all the 12 months. And then secondly, it is not sorted properly. So this is sorted alphabetically instead of chronologically. So here we need to fix this. 2 ways to do that. The first thing we're going to do is to find a way to display all the months in the pivot table, right? To do that, you can stand in the pivot table, right click, and you see pivot table options in your right click menu. When you click on this, you go to display, right? And then select to show items with no data on rows, right? If you do this, then we can now have all the months present. Now that we've done this, we can now go and order this or sort this properly. So to do that, we'll go to Power Pivot, okay? Then we'll go back to Manage. So this brings us here. Remember, we left it at the diagram view, so we'll switch to the data view. Now, in the calendar table, this is the month name that we need to sort. So I'll select it. Then sort, we look for the sort by column, right? So over here, I can now sort by the month column. Remember, this month column contains values, right? So when we do it like that, it will now order it properly as it should from January to December. Once you are done, you can exit and you'll notice that your pivot table responds. So based on our final visual, we need to find a way to extract just the first characters, right? So that we can use the space well. So to be able to do that, I will have to fill the next empty column with placeholders. It can be any letter. I've highlighted this and then I'll press Ctrl Enter, right? So I'll now give it a pattern JF, and then in the next empty cell, press a Ctrl E. So this gives me a flash fill, okay, of the various first characters in each month. Now, I just want the numbers here, okay? So I'll do an equal to and then bring in my values, okay? So maintaining the same structure, I can copy this down. This is what we want to use for our trend chart. So I want to test something here. I'm going to highlight this, okay, and then insert my line chart on this, right? So I'll come here and then use this line chart. Now you'll notice that because there are empty spaces or zeros here, this part of the chart goes flat, okay? So we need a way to format this so that this part is not plotted at all, right? Excel charts cannot plot NAs. So one way we can fix this is we can create an if statement, okay, that instead of referencing this directly, we can say that if this number here is greater than 0, then return that number. Otherwise, return an NA, right? So an NA is a function, open close bracket, okay, and then we close our final bracket for if. So this way, if there are numbers here, it shows the right number. If not, if I copy this down, I get my NAs, right? So this is the chart that we use to create our dashboard. So that completes this pivot table and the corresponding chart. The next one is the summary table that gives us a breakdown of all the payroll elements by department, right? So that one will be a bit straightforward. I'll stand in an empty cell, go to insert a pivot table from the data model, place it in this existing worksheet. So all the columns that we want are in the payroll, right? So we want to analyze basic, we want to analyze allowances, we want to analyze taxes, and then we also want to analyze the cost to employer, right? So all these I have selected from the payroll. So to break it down by department, I'll go to the records table, right? And then find the department and push it in the row section. Okay, so this will now give me the staging for the dashboard that I'm going to create here. So after completing this pivot table, you observe that we've almost covered everything here. We've created for active staff, exits, appraisal, cost to employer. We've also done the summary table for the payroll. We are only left with the turnover rate. Okay, so to calculate the turnover rate, we need the number of staff who have left over the average number of staff we had available at any point in time. We'll come back to the first table, the first pivot table, okay, and then we'll draw the number of active staff we had as a second column. Now, to be able to do that, I'll come to my pivot table, analyze, and then engage the field list. If I come to my records table, and then let's say I add the name of staff. So this now gives me the number of staff that we had at every point in time. Ideally, it would have been nice to have an average, but we'll make it a bit simpler. So we'll keep to the number of staff that we have and then our active staff at every point in time. Now, to get that turnover, I'm going to subtract these two, right? So 30 minus 23. Okay, so this is going to be my numerator, and I'll divide this by 30. Okay, so this is now going to give me 23%, right? It is this that we are going to use to create this donut chart. Now, to be able to create that, I need to calculate the remainder. So I'll do a 1 minus 23%, so that I have the full 100% to plot my donut chart, right? So this now completes all the staging pivot tables that we are going to use to create our dashboard. Now, the next thing we want to do is to transition to design our final dashboard. So we'll go through how to set up the mockup, the layout, and then choose the right colors to give us this final output. So this is the layout for our final dashboard. We'll proceed by defining some of the key elements in this design and then show you how to create the various elements. So usually when you are creating a dashboard, what is important is to set out your margins. Now, these are very important to help separate the elements for your user. Usually, we set these margins to 2 for those that we use to separate the elements. And then depending on your screen size, you can set the rest of the margins to accommodate the content. Right. Now, apart from the margins, you realize that this is a dark mode design. Usually, you can use anything between black, blue, or purple. But for this purpose, we used the dark blue theme to contrast the staff indicators on the left side and the organization indicators on the right side. The hex codes for these blue colors have been shared in the PDF in the video, right? So I'm going to copy this and then paste them in the Excel file, show you where we use each of these colors. So on the left side, that is the indicators for staff. We use this hex code. On the right side, that is for the organization indicators. We used this one. And then the yellow, we used this one. Now the border lines, we use this version of blue. And then our off-white for our border lines are here, right? So we combine these colors to give you this dark blue theme. Apart from the background, you also notice that our shapes have been intentionally morphed to give this transparent glass feel. You can adopt this so that you don't draw too much attention to the shapes while you use it to highlight or showcase some of the key indicators. Usually when people look at dashboards, the first place they look at is the top left and anything that falls between the top left and the top right, right? So let's learn how we created this morphed glass shape. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is to insert a regular shape. So I will insert this regular shape. Okay, so this is a regular shape that we used here. Now, instead of using the regular fill, I'll go to shape format, go to shape fill, and we'll use a gradient, right? Now, we'll go to more gradients. Okay, so this brings you to this pane. You can choose the gradient fill. Okay, now these ones have already been set. So basically what you need to do is to set two stops. Okay, so the first stop here is the white color, and then the last stop here is the default color that you use for this background, right? So you notice that it's the same hex code that I have used here. Now, after you set the stops, we set the transparency to 85% in each case, right? So that is going to give you that transparent glass feel. Now, after you set the fill to 85%, you need to work on the line. So we chose a solid line. So for the border line, you can use any of the darker themes. Okay, so let's use the shade that we have here. Okay. Now, what is important is once you set the border lines, you try to reduce the width to about 0.5. Okay, so that's will dim the edges a bit. Okay, so once you do that, this will now give you that transparent feel, and that is what you have used for our backdrop for our key metrics. Okay, so that covers the shapes that we used here. Now let me take away these codes and then we can concentrate on the rest of the dashboard elements. Right, so these are regular lines, and then we have some icons here. If you are using a current version of Excel, you can get icons right here. Okay, so we use these icons. You can change the colors and then use them to blend into your design. So now that we've set the stage for the key elements, what is important is we use these elements as backdrops, okay, to now project the key calculations that we did with the pivot table summaries. So the first thing that we are going to do is insert a regular shape inside this backdrop, right? So I'll go to insert, then I'll come to illustration shape, right? So this one is a transparent shape. So once we insert it, we'll come to the shape format, choose no fill, no outline. Okay, so that is how we'll make this sit nicely in the backdrop. Okay, now while this is selected, we need to put in our calculation. Right, so make sure you selected it. You click inside the formula bar, put in an equal sign, and then you come and reference your calculation. Right, so here this sits in the grand total. So I'll select this and press enter. You have your number now in the shape that you used. Usually, if you reference the pivot table and you get an error, it means that you have the get pivot data feature turned on. You can turn that off by coming to pivot table analyze options and then untick this generate get pivot data feature. That allows you to directly reference pivot tables for your calculations. You also need to ensure that you maintain the shape and the layout of these pivot tables so that when they are filters, they don't fold or collapse to distort your view. We will normally do that by right clicking, going to pivot table options. We did this earlier. You choose display and then show items with no data on rows. Okay, so this maintains the shape, right? So now back to our shape. We have our number here, it's not that visible. So we can center and middle align, okay, using these two, and then change the font. I normally use the Berlin Sun FB, okay, and then we set this to 28, okay. Now while we are here, we can make this white, right? So that is how we are going to be populating these shapes. So now that we have this, let's use the same method for our gender split. So I'll just Control Shift select and slide this to the right to duplicate it. Okay, and then position this here. Okay, and then I'll do same Control D to also position this right here. Now using the same method, so I'll select this equal to, come to the calculations, and then select for active staff for female is C4. Normally it resets the font when you reference it again. So I'll select this one again, then do an equal to, and then I'll reference the male. Okay, so usually you can format this by using an existing format. I'll go to home, double click on the paintbrush, touch this shape, and then touch that one as well. Okay, in both cases, you can reduce the fonts for the gender to about 20. Okay, so that at least we appreciate this is a breakdown of this key number. So we're going to repeat the process for the exits. Okay, so again, I'll slide this to the right. Okay, equal to, come to my calculations, and then click on grand total. Okay, then I'll do same for this one. For resignations, Control D for this one. I'll align this nicely and then come in for the inputs. So I'll come select this for resignations and then select and then reference this one for the terminations. So I already have existing formats here. So I'll click on this format painter and then ensure that I've applied the format to this one. For these ones, because the size is 20, I'll double click this and then touch these two as well, right? So that's what we can use to fill in. So that's how we complete this side of the dashboard. Now let's focus on the appraisal. So again, the key number is available in our calculation. To make it easier, I would like to reposition the calculations just close to the dashboard so we don't have to travel all the way. So this is the calculation for the average days or points. Okay, so for appraisal, we just need to reference the calculations from the pivot table. So to do that, I'll select the entire shape. This time around, we are putting it in the entire shape. Okay, so I'll do an equal sign and then come and select this appraisal average. Okay, so it sits nicely in here. So while it's selected, I'll use the same Berlin Sun font and then increase this to 28. Okay, and paint this white. Okay, now you'll notice that we were able to create this series of stars to represent the key metric that we have here. Let me show you how we did this. So again, you come to the calculations. So you come to the calculation sheet and insert a regular bar chart on this, right? So I'll come to insert and then insert a regular bar chart on this, right? This is a pivot chart. So I'm going to take off all the elements I don't need. So I'll take off and hide all the buttons, take off the grid lines, right? I just need the bars, right? So every element here is going off. Now for my x-axis, instead of setting this to the automatic value, I'm going to select it and press Ctrl 1, which now gives me access to setting the minimum and the maximum. So I'm going to set this to 5, okay? So this is going to be over 5. I want to fill the bar with stars instead of the regular color, right? So let's learn how we do this. So to do that, I'll go to the icons section under illustrations, okay, and then look for a star. Okay, so this black star is what I'm looking for. I'll insert this. Now the good thing about these office icons is that you can change the color, right? So I want this to be this gold or yellow color that is going to sit in nicely with the background of my dashboard, right? So you set it as you want it, okay? and then you copy, right? When you copy, a Control C would pin this to your clipboard, okay? So when you click on this bar and then you press Control 1, okay, you get the option to change the fill. So when we come to change the fill, we use a picture, right? Then we get the option to insert a picture source from our clipboard, okay, which will now bring the star that we just copied into the clipboard. Now below, you see options to stretch, to stack, and to stack and scale with, right? So we'll choose the last one, stack and scale with, okay? And we'll set this to 1, okay? So this way, you notice that it will now be in sync with the average points in our appraisal, okay? Then we can now take this off. So basically, it is this modified chart that we are going to use, and then we'll fit this nicely in our dashboard. Now, just to be sure this is working, let's insert the department slicer, okay? So I'll stand in the pivot table, go to insert, and then we insert a slicer. Now all the tables are in the all tab. So for my departments, I'm bringing this from the records table. So I'll choose department and I'll click OK. Okay. So the expectation is that if I click on administration 3.25, you see a bit of the fault star coming up. So 3.5 is exactly 3.5 as you see it here, right? So at least this is working. So let's cut this chart and then bring it to the dashboard. So I'll just paste this here. Now, what we need to do is to change the fill and make this transparent so that it blends in with our background. Okay, then you just need a bit of precision to make sure that the stars are positioned so just on top of the key number, right? While it is here, you can take off the shape outline, okay, so that it blends in nicely with your original shape. So that leaves us with something like this, right? So that's how we combine a regular bar chart to get the series of stars for our appraisal score. Now let's quickly do the cost to employer chart, the line chart that shows us the trend of cost to employer. So to do that, we'll come to our calculations. Our pivot table is already staged. We are doing it on the modified version, right? So I'll highlight this, insert, and then go to my line charts, and I'll use the one with markers. Okay, so we are basically interested in just the line. Okay, so I'll take off all the elements, the title, okay, and then I'll cut this one, Control X, bring it to my dashboard, and then fit this here. So this is where I fit my chart. So as usual, what we need to do is to take off the fill, and while we are here, we'll make the font white. Okay, now to make the line sync with our gold color, we'll select it and format it. So I've selected just the line. I'm going to press Ctrl 1 so I have access to the fill options for my line and my marker. Right, so here I'll change the line to a solid line and then use the gold color that we used here. This is for the line. Usually I like to reduce the width to about 1 point for contrast with the marker. And then once I'm done, I'll switch to the marker. So for the marker, we'll maintain the same gold color, and then we'll choose no border line for this. Okay, so this will give us something like this for our line. Then we can take off the border line for our main chart. So this goes off. So that's how we create the line chart. Okay, so for this bottom part of our dashboard, we've already staged the pivot table, right? So it's just a case of referencing what we've staged in the pivot table, right? So I'll do for administration, I'll do for basic pay, I'll do for the allowance, for my tax, and then finally for the costs to employer. Right, so I did this way so that you can just highlight, bring it down, and then press Ctrl D. Okay, so this now fills in for all the departments. Now, let's move on to our donut chart. So for our donut chart, we set the stage for that using the calculation of the turnover rate and the remainder, right? So if I come here and then I insert the recommended donut charts, that is right here, I get something like this, okay? So again, let's remove the noise. So we'll take off all the things that we don't need, and then we'll cut this. So I'll highlight this and then cut, and then bring it to the dashboard and then paste this, okay? So again, we need to size this to fit the display that we are looking for. So we have something like this, right? So the first thing that we do with this, as usual, is to take off the fill and then take off the border lines as well. Now for this, because we don't have a backdrop, it would be nice to give it a little shadow so that it stands out a bit from the background. Now let's deal with the rings. Okay, so I'll just select the ring, press Ctrl 1. So while we are here, I need to work on the portion that represents the 23%. So I select this portion alone, come to solid fill, and then I'll choose yellow for this. Okay. Now the borderline, I'll choose no borderline for that. Then switch to the remainder. So for the remainder, we are going to fill this with the white that we have over here. Okay, again, no borderline for that one as well. Now we can work on the donut hole size. So usually you can make it a bit thinner. So again, 85% is your magic number. So for this chart, we can display the actual percentage with a text box. So I'm going to insert, come to the text box, and then insert this text box right here. Okay, so I'll position this. We use the same method we use to fetch the inputs for our shapes. Select it, come to our equal sign, and then I'll select this 23%, right? So usually when you do that, you middle and center align, and then we take off the fill for that as well, and then the outline. Okay, then we can change the font to white, change the font type, and then increase this again to about 20. Okay, so this is how we create the donut chart. Just ensure that it's well positioned in the middle. So we're almost there. What we are left with is this timeline and then the slicer, right? We already have them here. So I'm going to select this, Control select this as well, and then I'll cut. Then bring this to the dashboard. So I'll paste this here, paste everything. Okay, as expected, we need to format these as well. Okay, so we start off with the slicer. So with the slicer, I'll select this. There are 6 departments. So I'll click on the slicer and then split the slicer into 6 columns. So I'll position my slicer and my timeline to make it easier to see all the buttons. Now, these have already been formatted. So to blend in with our theme, the slicer has already been formatted here. So I'll choose this, and then for our timeline, similar thing. When I come to the timeline, this has also been formatted. So usually you can modify some of the features with slicers and timelines, okay, to just make them sync to your dashboard. Now, after bringing in our slicers and timeline, one important thing you need to take note of is to connect these slicers to the relevant portions of your dashboard. So if I select the slicer and I right click, I have the options to connect them to the various pivot tables that are driving these visuals. Now, to know which pivot table you are connecting, it's useful to name the pivot tables. So let's quickly do that. So I'll go to the calculations, and then for each pivot table, we'll try and name them so that we know how to connect the slicer and the timeline. So for the active staff count, we'll use population for the name of this pivot table, and then we'll name this one exits. Okay, so you just select the pivot table, you go to the pivot table analyze, we call this one appraisal, then we call this one trend, and then this final one we'll call summary. So before we connect, the idea is this: because this is already a department slicer, we don't want it slicing this further. Okay, otherwise we'll just be left with what has been selected. Okay, so we'll connect this to all the other visuals apart from the summary, right? So you right click and then you go to report connections. It's already connected to appraisal. Okay, so I'll connect it to exits, connect it to the population, and then connect it to the trend. Okay, and then I'll click OK. So this way, if I select a particular department, you see that it responds, right? So that's how we are going to do that. So for the timeline too, we wanted to run through all the pivot tables, right? So I'll right click, then go to report connections and connect it to all the pivot tables as well, right? In some cases, you may want to exclude trends if the line charts is showing in years. But at this point, I think connecting it to everything is fine. So that's what you need to do to be able to get the slicer and the timeline to function effectively, connected to the right pivot tables. So there are a lot more features that you can use when it comes to creating dashboards like this. So far, you've learned about Power Query, Power Pivot, how to create DAX measures, and how we are using some of these features to bring out the key elements. If you want to deep dive how you can use these tools to create more interactive dashboards, then I recommend my book, Data Modeling with Microsoft Excel. Right, so you can get a copy from Amazon. I have dropped the link on the screen. So the book will give you a practical guide on how to use all these tools, plus DAX cube functions to create more insightful dashboards in Excel. So we are almost there. The last thing that we are going to do is to look up the details for each stuff, right? Now, for our purpose, we have a data validation that is already here. Now, this data validation is going to run on the register. Remember, in the register, we have a unique list of all the stuff. Okay, so usually to make it easier for you to pick all the details here, it will be good to select and name the range in the table so that when it expands, right, you don't have to reset the data validation. Right, so currently I have selected the list of names inside the table. Come and then in a name range, okay, let's call this names. Okay, so this then means that if I select names, this portion is going to be selected. So with this, I'm going to select the cell here, come to data, and in the data tools group, I'll select data validation, which is currently set to any value, right? So I'll choose a list. Then in the source, I'll give it the name that I just created on the staff list, right? So equal to names, and I'll click OK. So the expectation is that I should now see all the names here. Now, because you are using this in the table, when the table expands, we expect an automatic update to this list. Okay, so now that we have our employee names in this data validation, let's bring in our picture. The way we've designed this, the picture lookup is directly on the register, right? So we are going to bring in the picture from the register table. Okay, so this has been named register. The picture is in the column called picture, right? So in recent versions of Excel, beyond just looking up text and numbers, you can also look up pictures as well. So what we're going to do is we are going to use XLOOKUP or index match to bring in our picture. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a lookup formula to bring up the picture and then use the same lookup formula to bring in the results for these IDs. So I'm going to use XLOOKUP, right? So equal to XLOOKUP. So my lookup value is the selection here. Now, because I'm going to be copying this formula down, I'll use an F4 to lock this absolutely. You can look in the formula bar to make it a bit more visible for you. Then I'll bring a comma. I'll follow this up with my lookup array, which is basically the column that has my staff names in the register. The name of the table is register, so I'll bring in the register here, bring a square bracket, right, and then choose name. That is my lookup array. Now for my return array, this is the result that I'm looking for, right? So in the same register table, I'll bring in the register table, bring in a square bracket, right? And then go all the way down to the last column, which is the picture column, right? So these are the mandatory inputs for XLOOKUP. Now let's see what we get. So if I close my bracket and I press enter, you notice that the picture has appeared in the cell, but it's a bit tiny. So usually the trick is now to select the entire area and then come and merge this. Okay, so if I merge and center, it's now a bit more present, right? So this will now respond to any name that you choose. It's almost real time. Okay, so you can now bring in all the staff pictures. Okay, so the formula still lives here. So basically what I'm going to do here is to select this formula, okay, the XLOOKUP, and then use the formula in this space. Okay, so this formula gave us the picture as a return array. So basically what we need is to now change the portion of the XLOOKUP for all these labels as we go down. Okay, so one neat way to do this is to convert this portion of the formula into an indirect text, okay, so that it can reference the cells and it can copy down, right? So let's try that. So I'll put a double quote on the register up to the point where the label starts, okay, so just before the P, and then I'll put in the concatenation. So now instead of this picture, which is text, I'm going to reference this cell. Okay, so that is a cell that's I'm inputting here, and then I'll bring in another concatenation and then join this, okay, with the final closing bracket. Okay, so this gives me something like this, but I cannot use this directly in a return array. So here I need to wrap what I've done in a formula called indirect. Okay, and then this way it will now give me the actual reference that I need. So let's see what we get with this. So this gives us 1005, and then I can copy this down and then it will give me the outputs that reflects each label right here, right? So that is the advantage of using structured referencing in your formulas, right? So here I can center this nicely, and then let's see if this works. So this is Osbert. So if I choose Ernest, that's Ernest. If I choose the winger works. Okay, Daniel is also here, and then Bernard is here. Okay. So the idea is that if you want any staff detail, once you put in the name, the details of the staff, including the picture, will come up. Right, so this concludes our dashboard. Hopefully you've learned a lot of lessons. You can refer to our previous videos to explore more case studies, or you can get a copy of the book to also deep dive into how you can use Power Query, Power Pivot, DAX, Q functions, charts, slicers, timelines to be able to get insights from your data. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next dashboard video.
If this video was helpful and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finex Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos, or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.